Today we will dive into the most fascinating frontiers of neuroscience, which is neuronal transplantation. Imagine a world where damaged brains can be repaired and rewired, a world where our bodies can age, however our minds stay young and lucid. Well, this dream is closer to reality than you might think. And in this video, we will explore the cutting-edge science behind neuronal transplantation, its potential to revolutionize medicine, and how it opens the door to a new era of brain regeneration. Hi, I'm Yvette, and today I wanted to share with you the topic of my postdoc, which coincidentally is neuronal transplantation. So, without much further ado, let's dive into this wonderful field. To grasp the significance of neuronal transplantation, first we must understand the complexity of the brain. So the brain is the most complex organ in the whole universe, and it governs all that we feel, think and do. Just a side note brain wow fact. So the brain makes up around 2% of our body weight. However, it receives around 20% of our blood supply. This means that if the weight of the brain had to expand according to its blood supply, it would weigh around 14 kilos in a 70 kilo person. Yeah, quite a lot, right? So anyway, we continue on. The brain is made up of different cellular components, all of which are helping in one way or another. However, just for today and for simplicity's sake, I will focus on one cell type, which is, yeah, I know you're my favorite, but it's not today, sorry. Yeah, that was microglia, my favorite cell type. However, for today, we are going to focus on neurons. I am sure that most of you have heard of the cell type, as neurons are considered to be the fundamental units of the brain, as they are associated with the processing of information. They can make sense out of the internal and external stimuli that we receive, and also they hold our memories. And they do all of this by communicating to each other through electrical signals. So actually, how do neurons work? So far we have spoken about a neuron in a singular form, which is far from the truth, because a singular neuron will hardly make a difference. However, neurons have this hidden power when they are amassed together, so as to form this neural network. I am sure that we've heard of neural networks in the computing field. However, this idea came actually from our brain, as all of us possess a natural neural network. This relates to neurons which are in constant communication to each other. So when we are processing information, is the whole of our brain involved in this? And actually that's not the case, because each and every area of the brain is associated with a particular task. For example, the frontal area is more related to decision making and cognitive tasks. And for example, the parietal lobe is more associated to language and how we understand and how we can communicate to others. And lastly, if we go more caudal and we get to the occipital lobe, this area is associated to process visual stimuli. So just another side wow brain fact. So the brain has around 100 billion neurons. And since our brains are not used to processing these huge numbers, just to put it into context, this number roughly corresponds to the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. A lot, right? So one cool ability of the brain is called brain plasticity, and what it actually means is the ability of the brain to change in response to stimuli. During development, this would mean that the brain is able to produce new neurons. However, as we become adults, this ability starts to slow down, and brain plasticity starts to rely more on the restructuring of neurons and how they communicate with each other. So since we touched on brain plasticity, and now we know that in adulthood the generation of new neurons is slowed down, we can easily understand that an injury and disease in the adult brain results in a loss of neurons in one way or another, which is greater than the regenerative capacity of the brain. Actually, what happens to neurons in injury or disease? Again, for simplicity's sake, let's say that there are three scenarios. So for example, in the first scenario is that the cells surrounding neurons are actually damaged, and then as a secondary outcome, neurons start to degrade. For example, in this case, it's multiple sclerosis, whereby the demyelination of neurons, or in other words, when oligodendrocytes stop doing what they should do, then neurons are exposed and they start to degrade. The second scenario is when something weird starts to happen in the neurons, and this abnormal neuronal functionality will start to result in its degradation. For example, it is in Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or ALS. With all these diseases that are associated with the misfolding of proteins, which eventually start to aggregate together and form a beta flux in Alzheimer's, And then there is a third scenario of why a neuron would start to die, and that is usually the result of an outside insult. For example, this happens with stroke, whereby neurons will start to lack perfusion, which is the blood supply in smaller words, or for example in traumatic brain injury, whereby the severed neurons will die because they have physical damage. So the end result of what we have seen in these three scenarios is all about loss of neurons. And what does that mean actually? So when we're losing neurons, and we're not just losing one or two, but we're losing a lot, we start to lose information. So let's go back to the neuronal network that we've mentioned before. So when a neuron dies, a hole in the network is created. If one neuron is lost, the network will be able to compensate for that lost neuron, as there is some redundancy in the brain. However, if enough neurons are lost from the network starts to break down and malfunction. And depending on the brain areas that are affected by this loss of neurons will result in a loss of our ability. For example, in ALS, since it's motor neurons that are usually affected, then the person starts to lose its motor abilities. Or for example with Alzheimer's, whereby the memory areas of the brain are affected and therefore we see an increase in dementia. So having said this, what are we as scientists trying to do to combat the loss of neurons in disease and injury? And actually there are three ways how it's actually being done. And that is by understanding the disease. The second is to look for drugs or treatments, how to halt or slow down or regress the progression of the disease. And thirdly, it is to look for ways how to repair the damage in the brain. And of course, a neuronal replacement approach falls under the third part. So as you might have realized, neuronal transplantation is part of a neuronal replacement approach. However, in neuronal replacement therapy, there are two main other fields, and that is the reprogramming of other cells into neurons, and the third approach, which would be the recruitment of stem cells, which are these immature cells that can give rise to neurons. So let's go back to the damaged neural network. And the idea behind neuronal transplantation is that new neurons are introduced into the damaged area of the brain, which would eventually fill the hole, so to speak, in the network. And usually what we do is to have a neuronal culture in vitro, and then these cells are injected into the damaged part of the brain. So from this, you can see a big limitation of transplantation. So it's cool and all, while it is an ideal technique for localized diseases, you can imagine that neuronal transplantation is not ideal for diseases which are affecting the whole brain, and this is due to the fact that the introduction of new neurons is limited to the injection site. So let's talk a little bit about the history of neuronal transplantation. So yeah, this area also has a history, even though it sounds very futuristic. In the mid of the 20th century, there were rodent studies which showed that indeed neuronal transplantation is possible, and the new neurons are able to survive in this environment. In the 80s, there was a huge step forward as fetal cells were used in a clinical trial to see if they can counteract the effects of Parkinson's disease. So actually, the initial trial gave a lot of mixed results. And in fact, since then, scientists and clinicians have been working together to figure out standardized protocols in order to obtain a higher survival rate of the new neurons, but also to reduce the potential of harmful side effects. In addition to all of this, so far what I have mentioned was Parkinson's disease and neuronal transplantation. However, other diseases and injuries are candidates for such a treatment. So even though the field of neuronal transplantation has advanced so much since the 80s, us scientists are focusing our attention on better understanding the diseases themselves, standardizing protocols so that hopefully the results are less variable from one patient to another. And the third part is to experimentally understand better neuronal transplantation. So for example, the lab that I'm in has recently discovered that the disease or injury plays a major role in the connectivity of transplanted neurons. And like these studies, many other scientists are trying to uncover the truth to improve our understanding of neuronal transplantation. So dear viewers, this brings me to the conclusion of this video. I hope that you enjoyed and you have also learned something about the fascinating world of neuronal transplantation. I also hope that you have learned that while it is an exciting neuronal replacement therapy, you also take home with you that it is not as one size fits all, and each disease has to be individually assessed whether if it is a good fit for neuronal neuronal transplantation or not. However, I do hope that in the near future that this approach will be adopted by the clinics as a standard protocol to treat certain brain diseases and injuries. So just as a little final disclaimer, I want to point out that I really avoided to go into detail so that I keep it as simple as possible and deliver the message to you. However, this does not mean that the field of neuronal transplantation is a simple one, and actually there are many complex factors that need to be taken into consideration. So if you enjoyed watching this video, I encourage you to hit the like and subscribe button, and if you want to watch more videos from this channel, I can suggest this one. Otherwise, thanks for watching and see you next time. Ciao ciao!